Picture this. The greatest gunslinger in the history of European film wasn't some rugged American, but rather a timid youngster hailing from Venice, Italy. We are talking about a child who actually learned to converse in German way before mastering Italian. This youngster lived through the horrific Allied airstrikes during World War II, cowering in a basement as the heavens above Dresden glowed an eerie crimson. Later on, his talent reps would literally look this kid in the eye and warn his mum that his personality was completely wrong for a career in show business. Boy, did they miss the mark on that prediction. They completely misjudged the situation, considering that bashful child eventually matured into a massive star who outsold Clint Eastwood at the Italian box office. He even moved more theatre admissions across Germany than the James Bond franchise. He wound up shooting 18 movies alongside a co-star who morphed into his absolute best friend in the world, yet masking that iconic smile and piercing blue gaze was a grieving father who had to lay his 16-year-old boy to rest during a bitter, freezing January evening in Massachusetts. Then, right around the time he hit 60 years old, when the industry had pretty much written him off, he strolled onto a television lot and cranked out the absolute most massive success of his entire run. He was born Mario Girotti, though audiences around the globe celebrated him as Terence Hill. Get ready for 10 incredibly well-documented chapters of his journey that history books verify, yet the general public remains completely clueless about. So let us dive right in. Coming in at number 10, we have the child who made it through the apocalyptic Dresden fires. Mario Girotti entered the world on March 29, 1939, right in the heart of Venice, Italy. And right off the bat, we have to debunk a massive myth, since almost every single piece of information you stumble across on the internet totally botches this detail. He definitely did not originate in Dresden, Germany. His actual birthplace was Venice, and folks only get their wires crossed due to the crazy events that unfolded shortly afterward. His dad, Girolamo Girotti, made a living as a chemist from Italy, pulling a paycheck from the German medical giant Schering AG. Meanwhile, his mom, Hildegard Thiem, hailed from a pretty wealthy German lineage rooted in Lomatz, a tiny village sitting roughly 40 kilometers outside of Dresden. Her folks actually ran the local Karl Menzel glass manufacturing plant. Mario landed right in the middle of three boys, and right around 1943, when the Allied forces started dropping payloads on Italian turf, the whole crew packed up and fled to his mum's native stomping grounds in Saxony. His father routinely traveled back and forth to a chemical facility located in Dresden. The family was bunking at 40 Dobeln Street in Lommatzsch when an absolute nightmare became reality, as the Allied military unleashed a fiery hellstorm upon Dresden, right in the thick of February 1945. Decades down the line, Hill could still picture the chaos like it happened yesterday. The whole clan hunkered down in the basement alongside his mum, peering out to witness the heavens over Dresden glowing blood red, while knowing his pop was clocked in for work over in that exact metropolis. Radio silence dragged on for a full 7 days without a single word from him. Panic set in, as everyone was convinced he had perished in the blasts, until his uncle eventually hopped on a bike and pedaled straight into the smouldering rubble of the city, desperately trying to track the man down. By some absolute miracle, Girolamo made it out alive, though the emotional scars permanently stuck with little Mario. During a sit-down chat in 2018, Hill confessed that those terrifying airstrikes gave him bad dreams up until he hit 30 years of age. He pointed out that folks cannot possibly fathom the psychological toll an explosion takes on a kid, regardless of whether they dodge physical injury, noting that such an ordeal fundamentally rewires a person forever. Eventually, the household bailed for Italy right around 1947, making a run for it to ditch the Soviet-controlled territories. They ended up putting down roots in his dad's native Emilia, over in the Umbria region, before ultimately migrating down to Rome. Tragedy struck when his mum passed away back in 1956, while Mario was just a 17-year-old kid, and surprisingly enough, his primary tongue was actually German. The Star once mentioned that simple phrases involving rest or expressing affection carry way more emotional weight for him when spoken in German compared to any other dialect. It turns out that the absolute darling of Italian cinema actually spent his childhood chatting in German and having night terrors about falling explosives. Moving on to number 9, we have the hardcore swimmer that caught everyone completely off guard. Way before he ever stood in the spotlight of a movie set, Mario Girotti was a fiercely dedicated sportsman. He raced in the water for the elite Lazio organization down in Rome, which happened to be the exact same high-end athletic facility where a youthful Carlo Pedersoli was busy shattering national aquatic records and making Olympic appearances. Surprisingly, Girotti and Pedersoli never once crossed paths while hanging around the deck. Pedersoli had a solid 10 years on him, yet they both carved through the exact same swimming lanes for the identical team, just in different eras. Fast forward several decades, and these two guys would eventually morph into the most iconic pair in European filmmaking. But back then, little Mario even snagged a bronze hardware piece at a National Junior Aquatic Championship. He also hit the water as a rower, taking home a silver medal alongside a crew known as Tevere Roma. To top off that insane athletic resume, he threw himself into hardcore artistic gymnastics, mastering the parallel bars, the vault, and pretty much the whole 9 yards. The guy literally maintained a fully equipped gymnastics setup inside his barn until the day he died. Standing at 5'11" and weighing somewhere around 175 pounds during his peak years, the dude was totally ripped, lightning fast, and packed serious power. A piece written by the Los Angeles Times back in 1977 painted him as a guy with perfect posture, piercing blue eyes, and an agility that felt almost animalistic. He truly glided around like a panther, and every single crazy acrobatic feat you witnessed on camera was 100% genuine. There were absolutely no stuntmen, zero hidden cables, and no camera magic involved. It was purely a dude who had pushed his physical limits since he was a little kid and simply refused to quit. Which is crazy when you remember this is the exact same fella whose own representatives claimed he was bound to fail. These industry folks stared right at an elite swimmer, an accomplished gymnast, a youngster rocking icy blue eyes and boasting the reaction time of a prize fighter, yet they somehow saw zero potential. Dropping in at number 8 is the moniker he adopted to pay tribute to his late mom. Right around the age of 12, little Mario caught his big break when filmmaker Dino Risi went hunting for a tough kid gang leader to cast in a movie. A set runner hanging around the Lazio Aquatic Center pointed the crew toward the blue-eyed youngster, and naturally, his mom dragged him straight over to read for the part. He made his debut in the 1951 flick, Vacation with a Gangster. He absolutely despised the experience, as the kid was so incredibly introverted that his heart would hammer out of his chest at 150 beats a minute before they even yelled action. Sometimes the sheer anxiety would literally give him a fever, yet his mum kept shoving him into the spotlight. She had spotted a hidden spark inside the boy ever since he was barely 4 years old. She set up equestrian training and English tutoring for him, practically sensing that her kid was destined to make a living, saddling up and delivering lines in Hollywood. Throughout the following 15 years, the young Girotti racked up credits in about 30 different movies, all while rolling with his given name. He managed to score a solid backup part alongside Burt Lancaster and Alain Delon in Visconti's masterpiece The Leopard back in 1963, though folks past the Italian border had no clue who the guy was. Right after that, he went ahead and made the most boneheaded career move imaginable. Between 1964 and 1967, Girotti packed up for Germany to take the lead in those Karl May adventure flicks, which were basically cheap productions the locals jokingly called sauerkraut westerns. During this stint, he shot a bunch of features alongside Stuart Granger and Lex Barker. All the while, the spaghetti western craze was blowing up back on his home turf without him even being involved. Sergio Leone was busy cranking out a fistful of dollars, Clint Eastwood was morphing into an international icon, and poor Mario Girotti was stuck over in Germany, totally missing the boat. He eventually confessed that he kicked himself incredibly hard over the whole ordeal. He had wandered off to shoot cheap knockoffs while the genuine cinematic revolution was kicking off right in his own backyard, but then, out of nowhere, a crazy stroke of luck hit him. Down in Spain during 1967, filmmaker Giuseppe Calizzi was in the middle of shooting God Forgives I Don't, when his leading man Peter Martell completely busted his leg. Calizzi desperately needed a stand-in on the fly, and somebody ended up tossing Girotti's name into the hat. There was just a single catch holding the deal back. The studio brass insisted on an English-sounding moniker to make him marketable overseas, so Girotti's rep slid a piece of paper across the desk featuring 20 different names and gave him exactly 24 hours to make a call, leading him to go with Terence Hill. Now, here comes the crazy twist that practically no one is aware of. He specifically went with those initials, T and H, simply because they lined up perfectly with his deceased mum's initials, Hildegard Thiem, the very woman who had nudged him into the show business world. She was the very same lady who set up his horseback riding sessions and foreign language tutoring. The same mother who had passed away when he was merely 17, and he brilliantly tucked her identity right into his own, carrying that silent homage with him for the remainder of his professional life. The kid whose own rep swore he would totally bomb out had just rebranded himself from scratch, and that exact title was on the verge of exploding into one of the most legendary brands in all of European filmmaking. Hitting spot number 7, let us talk about the movies that absolutely crushed Sergio Leone at the box office. Back in 1970, filmmaker Enzo Barboni shopped around a concept that basically every single suit in Italy had tossed in the trash, simply because the guy was dead set on directing a comedy-western hybrid. Studio executives kept barking at him that theatergoers craved gritty gunfights and body counts, not punchlines. Finally, one bold backer gave him the green light, and believe it or not, the top pick for the starring gig was not Terence Hill at all, but actually Franco Nero, the dude who originated the Django role. When Nero ended up being booked solid, the team brought Hill on board, mainly because the guy was a dead ringer for Nero. The picture hit theaters under the title They Call Me Trinity, and they slapped the whole thing together for barely 400 million lira, which was an absolute joke of a budget even for the Italian film scene. The movie raked in roughly 6 to 7 billion lira just within Italy's borders, landing at a single spot beneath the good, the bad, and the ugly when it came to total ticket sales. However, it was the follow-up film that completely blew the doors off the record books. The sequel, Trinity Is Still My Name, dropped in 1971, and managed to pull an insane 14,554,172 attendees in Italy, crowning it the most lucrative Italian picture ever made up until that era. Every last one of Sergio Leone's timeless masterpieces was officially eating its dust. Over in Germany, the flick moved an unbelievable 12,267,000 tickets. That mind-blowing run cemented it as the 7th biggest smash hit in the history of the German box office. A cheap, goofy western headlined by a couple of dudes that absolutely no one in the States recognized had completely crushed every massive blockbuster Leone ever put out. Breaking the mold completely, the Trinity franchise birthed the Fagioli, or Bean Western, swapping out bloody shootouts for laugh-out-loud brawls. While Clint Eastwood's iconic drifter stayed quiet and lethal, our guy Trinity served as his exact opposite. Picture this. The dude literally arrived snoozing on a horse-drawn sled right across the scorching sand. Between flashing that signature smile and catching some Z's, he'd scarf down ridiculous amounts of beans, and his eventual fistfights played out like flawlessly timed dance routines. Stunt coordinator Giorgio Ubaldi literally kept rhythm out loud, so every single block and strike landed perfectly. Because of this extreme precision, wrapping up just one brawl could easily eat up 10 whole days of production. Fast forward a few decades, and Quentin Tarantino actually snagged the Trinity theme song to wrap up Django Unchained. What's even wilder is how the German dubbing team completely overhauled the script to pack in more laughs than the Italian cut, stuffing hilarious punchlines into completely silent scenes. Because of those punch-ups, the movies practically blew up bigger in Germany than they did back in Italy. This kid, who was once told by reps that his career was going nowhere, suddenly smashed every single domestic ticket sales record. Best of all, he pulled it off simply by being hilarious. Coming in at number 6, we have the ultimate dynamic duo of the European silver screen. Terence Hill and Bud Spencer, originally named Carlo Pedisoli, actually shared a credit way back in 1959 on a historical epic named Hannibal alongside Victor Mature. However, they didn't share a single frame and never crossed paths on the lot until the 1967 production of God Forgives I Don't. The spark between them was immediate and undeniable. You had Hill, this slender, quick-moving, drop-dead gorgeous guy with striking blue eyes, paired with Spencer, a massive 6'3" powerhouse weighing well over 250 pounds. Bud rocked fists the size of serving platters and a totally stone-cold glare that hit harder than his punches. Teaming up, the duo cooked up a signature move dubbed the Pigeon Punch. Hill broke down exactly how the gag worked. Whenever Bud clobbered a guy on the dome, instead of just crumpling, the victim would pop up into the air before hitting the dirt like a blasted bird. Obviously, Bud was the mastermind behind the actual smashing part. Meanwhile, Hill came up with that delayed, bouncy reaction and the final flop. That goofy little slapstick routine became their absolute trademark, carrying them through 18 joint projects from 1959 to 1994. By the time 1975 rolled around, their movies had already raked in north of $50 million just in the Italian market. They wrapped up their collaborative run in 1994 with Troublemakers, a hilarious Western reunion with Hill sitting in the director's chair. Over a span of almost 40 years working side by side, Bud Spencer constantly repeated one specific phrase about their bond. "We never once had a fight," he claimed at banquets, red carpets, and pretty much everywhere else. He even proudly dropped that fact while they were picking up a combined Lifetime Achievement Trophy at the 2010 David Di Donatello event. Think about how insane that is for a business running purely on vanity and drama. These two guys collaborated constantly for 35 years without ever having a falling out. Coming in at number 5, we're looking at the most hardcore guy in the humor business. Terence Hill wasn't some soft joke teller pretending to be a badass. He was a genuinely rugged dude blessed with incredible comedic timing. Fact is, both he and Spencer handled all their own action sequences from day one. They didn't rely on stuntmen or padded landings whatsoever. If you need evidence, just look at this totally unbelievable but absolutely true moment from the Lucky Luke franchise back in the early 1990s. The screenplay required his character to literally take a nap beside a full-grown lion. In response, production shipped over a completely wild beast from Colorado, scattered fresh meat chunks all over the actor, and basically just instructed him to play dead. Keep in mind, the guy was well into his 50s at the time. The massive predator took a good sniff, circled his body, and suddenly lunged straight for the camera before rushing the nearby saloon facade. Through all of that chaos, Hill stayed totally frozen until the panicked crew finally yelled at him to bail. There was zero CGI involved in that shot. It was quite literally just an actor chilling with steaks on his chest next to an apex predator, all for the sake of getting the perfect take. Way before this, while rolling cameras for Watch Out, We're Mad, things got pretty dicey. A prop bench meant to shatter on a wall ended up cracking Hill squarely on the skull instead. He was left bleeding heavily from a massive gash, forcing an ambulance to rush in and stitch him right up. Crazy enough, he returned to the set before the sun went down. After a random mom approached him on the sidewalk to express her gratitude for creating family-friendly entertainment, he made a personal vow to keep his content wholesome and his action sequences completely authentic. This wasn't some PR gimmick either. He strictly followed those rules for the next 40 years of his life. Moving to number 4, let's talk about a romance that defied the usual celebrity curse. While shooting God Forgives I Don't in Almeria, Spain back in 1967, a fresh-faced Italian guy using his new stage name crossed paths with the production's American speech coach. That woman was Laurie Zwickelbauer, who had Bavarian roots. The pair tied the knot on July 23, 1967. A couple of years later, on November 7, 1969, they welcomed their first boy, Jess. Later on, around 1973, while the star was busy making Watch Out, We're Mad out in Germany, their family grew again. They officially brought home an infant son from a clinic in Munich when he was merely 3 days old. They decided to name the little guy Ross. Eventually, the whole crew laid down roots on a sprawling property in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, tucked right into the Berkshires. Out there, the actor spent his time cultivating imported Italian crops, taking care of small livestock, and hanging out with a pony bought specifically for his kids. Calling that farm home since 1971, you basically had this monumental European cinema legend chilling in the New England countryside, just tending to his tomato garden. Fast forward to 2025, and Terence and Laurie are celebrating 58 solid years of matrimony. While showbiz usually tears couples apart for fun, these two stayed totally rock solid. They weathered the insane spotlight, the box office bombs, and the most devastating tragedy imaginable, without ever breaking apart. Hitting number 3 on our list, we find a massive talent who simply proved way too humble for the States, marking the biggest question mark of his entire professional journey. For more than 10 years, the guy absolutely dominated the European box office. Nobody walking the earth moved more cinema seats in Italy than he did, and he achieved absolute icon status throughout Germany, Spain, France, and all the way down to South America. Despite all that, the US market gave him zero traction. It wasn't for lack of trying on Hollywood's part, considering his most acclaimed project was 1973's My Name is Nobody. an incredibly smart Western masterminded by the legendary Sergio Leone. The director literally matched him up on screen with Henry Fonda. Ennio Morricone himself composed the soundtrack for that flick. It ended up raking in 3.6 billion lira back home and moved a staggering 6.2 million stubs in Germany alone. Even Steven Spielberg openly admitted it was his absolute favorite Leone picture, and it still rocks a flawless 100% score on Rotten Tomatoes. The star himself always calls it his finest work, yet audiences in the States barely blinked. Next up was 1977's Mr. Billion, a massive 20th Century Fox production heavily backed by Dino De Laurentiis with a $4.6 million war chest featuring heavyweights like Valerie Perrine and Jackie Gleason. It totally tanked at the box office. Similarly, his $8 million French Foreign Legion epic, March or Die, which rolled out that exact same year alongside Gene Hackman and Catherine Deneuve, completely underperformed. Someone from the Los Angeles Times actually dropped by the production and published a seriously harsh takeaway. The journalist basically claimed that if the actor ever wanted to hit A-list status in the US, he needed to quit hanging out with the background cast. That writer was completely baffled seeing the lead star physically running to fetch his own wardrobe from the trailer. Hill was just trying to help the director capture one final shot before they lost the perfect desert lighting. Decades down the line, the Rake magazine finally addressed the elephant in the room by asking, was the guy literally just too kind-hearted for this business? They painted him as essentially a sillier version of Paul Newman. His genuine friendliness, down-to-earth vibe, and total rejection of that toxic celebrity arrogance were exactly what made European crowds fall madly in love with him. However, he was totally mismatched for a US industry that practically required cutthroat behavior and endless vanity. So, in this bizarre twist of fate, one of the 20th century's biggest global icons quietly slipped through the States without leaving a footprint, and almost nobody stateside realized what they were missing. Coming in at number 2 is the horrific evening that shattered his world. On January 30th, 1990, his 16-year-old son Ross was out driving with a buddy named Kevin Lehman on slick winter roads right there in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, when they completely lost control. Their vehicle slammed violently into a tree, tragically killing both young men on impact. Ross was barely 16 years old and had already shared the screen with his dad in the 1987 movie They Call Me Renegade. The kid had just landed the role of Billy the Kid for a brand new Lucky Luke TV adaptation. Friends remembered him as an incredibly talented sports star who, mirroring his dad, was totally fluent in English, Italian, and German. The actor was actually stationed out at the Bonanza Creek Ranch outside Santa Fe, New Mexico, gearing up for that exact same production when he got the horrific call. He later confessed that a massive piece of his soul died that day, and he ultimately dedicated the entire Lucky Luke feature to both boys. Production completely scaled back the original 13-episode order to a mere 8 chapters, since the devastated father plunged into a severe depression and could hardly make it out of bed. He basically vanished from the spotlight entirely. The exact same guy who had spent his life bringing endless joy to millions was now struggling to survive each morning. For nearly 10 years straight, Terence Hill practically became a ghost. Europe's most beloved screen legend was completely swallowed up by his mourning. The public pretty much accepted that his acting days were done forever. Taking our number 1 spot, we have the ultimate return that absolutely no one predicted. When January 2000 rolled around, a 60-year-old Terence Hill suddenly popped up on Italian screens, playing the beloved character Father Matteo Bondini. Picture a friendly Catholic clergyman pedaling his bike through the historic streets of Gubbio, aiding local cops with their murder cases while sharing profound life lessons with the townsfolk. Titled Don Matteo, the series featured an aging spaghetti western icon taking on the role of a humble clergyman for public broadcasting. Critics thought it would flop entirely. Instead, it transformed into an absolute juggernaut, shattering viewership records across Italian broadcasting history. Spanning 13 seasons and roughly 260 episodes, before he finally stepped away in 2022, Hill cemented this character as a true cultural phenomenon. Week after week, it pulled in anywhere from 6 to 7 million folks, capturing a massive 25 to 30% of the market share. When the 13th season kicked off, a staggering 6,541,000 people tuned in to watch. The franchise eventually reached more than 30 nations around the globe, even inspiring local remakes for Polish and Russian audiences. This captivating performance earned him the top acting prize at the 42nd Monte Carlo Television Festival. It felt like destiny, especially since his dad used to read him tales about St. Francis of Assisi during his childhood, aiming to improve his Italian while teaching him the importance of compassion and harmony. Many years down the road, he would spend 22 years portraying that universally adored clergyman. But tragedy struck when his boy passed away. The heartbreak pulled him into an incredibly dark place, making it seem like his acting days were permanently finished. Yet, right around the time his peers were hitting the golf course and taking home career tribute trophies, he stepped back in front of the cameras. That is when he breathed life into the most beloved role he had ever tackled. Forget Trinity or nobody. By playing a man of the cloth, the kid who was once written off by his own representatives mounted a massive comeback, silencing his doubters once and for all. Sadly, on June 27, 2016, his longtime friend Bud Spencer passed away in Rome at 86 years old. He got the heartbreaking call while visiting Almeria, Spain, which just so happened to be the very spot they first crossed paths back in 1967. He later mentioned that after the initial wave of grief washed over him, a profound sense of peace followed, confirming his belief that the universe does not make mistakes. During the memorial service, grieving fans actually belted out the theme song from Watch Out We're Mad, while pallbearers carried the casket outside. When it was his turn to speak, his tribute was incredibly straightforward. He remembered his friend as a pure delight, confidently adding that whenever they cross paths in the afterlife, his old buddy will greet him with their classic catchphrase, "We never even had a single argument." Fast forward to 2025, and the legendary star is 86 years of age. He proudly carries passports for 3 different nations, including Italy, America, and Germany. His German naturalization was finalized in 2022 to honor his deceased mom. This was the exact same woman whose initials he secretly baked into his famous Hollywood moniker 55 years prior. The man is completely fluent in 5 distinct languages. These days, he bounces back and forth between his Italian residence in Gubbio and a sprawling property located in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. They even built an entire exhibit celebrating his legacy back in 2019, right in his mother's childhood village of Lommatzsch, Germany. His verified Facebook account boasts an impressive 2.5 million devoted fans. In December 2024, he dropped a quick update for his supporters, officially bidding farewell to the old year and teasing fresh creative ventures for 2025. He went from a Venetian kid dodging airstrikes to a competitive athlete conquering the silver screen. We watched a native Italian transform into a gritty gunslinger, and later saw that same gunslinger put on a clerical collar. He is the ultimate story of a grieving dad hitting rock bottom, only to rise from the ashes. Terence Hill, Mario Girotti. This is the guy whose own management team told him to pack it in, prompting him to spend the next 70 years making them look like absolute fools. Kicking off our countdown at number 10, he actually lived through the horrific bombing raids over Dresden when he was just a little kid. Coming in at number 9, his background as a hardcore swimmer and gymnast meant he absolutely refused to let a stuntman take his hits. Moving to number 8, when the studio made him pick a new alias, he subtly paid tribute to his late mom by using her initials. For number 7, he launched the massive Trinity franchise, pulling in more box office cash than anything Sergio Leone ever directed. Down at number 6, he teamed up with Bud Spencer to deliver the most iconic comedic duo in European movie history. Hitting number 5, he tackled his own dangerous action sequences, which even included getting uncomfortably close to a completely wild lion. At number 4, he tied the knot with Laurie back in 1967, kicking off a rock-solid marriage that lasted 58 years. Number 3 reminds us that his genuinely kind personality clashed with the cutthroat Hollywood machine, which is why American audiences never fully appreciated his genius. Our number 2 fact covers the devastating loss of his 16-year-old adopted boy, Ross, during a horrific 1990 vehicle crash that almost broke him permanently. Finally, at number 1, he completely reinvented himself in his 60s as Don Mateo, delivering the most spectacular success story of his entire professional life. If you just discovered some fresh trivia about the legendary Terence Hill today, go ahead and smash that subscribe button while ringing the bell. We are on a mission to dig up those incredible hidden gems that mainstream pop culture left behind, honoring one cinematic titan at a time.